The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting shadows that danced across the weathered walls of the cabin. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, burying Medicine Peak Valley under another layer of winter white. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters, reminding anyone who listened that the mountains gave nothing freely. Jack Stone sat in his chair by the fire, hands folded across his lap. At 78, those hands trembled slightly, marked by arthritis and decades of mountain cold. But the eyes above them remained sharp gray, yet storm clouds missing nothing. Across from him sat Thomas Brennan Jr., 26 years old, notebook open on his knee, pen poised. The young man had arrived 3 days ago, riding through a blizzard that would have turned most men back. His father, the territorial surveyor, had sent him with a letter of introduction and a single request learned from the old healer before his knowledge died with him. Thomas cleared his throat. The silence had stretched long. "Mr. Stone, my father said you have a story about the first woman you trained." Jack's mouth twitched, something that might have been a smile on a different face. "First, no, son. Emma wasn't the first. She was the only one who stayed." He reached for the poker, stirred the fire. Sparks flew upward, disappearing into the chimney's darkness. "And it's not a love story, though. That's what people want to hear. It's a story about a debt I couldn't pay and a decision that nearly destroyed everything I'd built." Thomas leaned forward, the notebook forgotten. Jack stared into the flames, seeing not the present fire, but one from 40 years past. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decades. "To understand why I agreed to take Emma Hayes, you need to know who I was, what I'd been." The fire popped. Snow whispered against the windows. "In 1865, when I was 18 years old, I was an indentured servant in Boston. My parents sold me at 14 to pay their debts. 7-year contract to a shipyard owner." His jaw tightened, old rage still burning beneath the surface. "That man beat his workers, fed us spoiled food, treated us like animals because in his eyes that's what we were, property with expiration dates." Thomas said nothing, sensing the story needed no interruption. "At 18, I ran, stole a horse and headed west. Bounty hunters chased me for 2 years before giving up. By 1867, I reached Montana, half dead from exposure and fever." Jack's voice softened just slightly. "A Shoshone woman named Anna Redbird found me, saved my life, spent 3 weeks nursing me back from the edge. When I recovered and tried to leave, she stopped me, said I'd been given a second chance at life and I could either waste it running or use it learning something worthwhile." He looked at Thomas directly. "Anna didn't just teach me healing, she taught me something I'd lost: honor. She said, 'They treated you like an animal, but you are not an animal. You choose what kind of man you become, and that choice defines you.'" The fire crackled. The wind howled. "I lived with her 10 years, learned everything she knew. When she died in 1877, I made an oath to myself I would never make another person into property, never take someone's freedom the way mine was taken." Jack's hands gripped the chair arms. "And then in 1880, I broke that oath." Thomas straightened, eyes widening slightly. "How?" "I saved a man's life, William Hayes, timber mill owner from Ashford Creek. And 5 years later, when I needed help, I accepted his daughter as payment." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jack met the young man's gaze. "That's why I'm telling you this story, son. Not to impress you, not to entertain, to warn you, to teach you that even when a man breaks his honor, he can still find redemption if he's brave enough to face the consequences." Thomas swallowed hard, gripped his pen tighter. "What happened?" Jack settled back, eyes distant, seeing another time. "It started with blood and snow, 5 years before Emma, the winter of 1880. The story unfolded. Jack was 33, then living alone in the high country, already building a reputation as the mountain healer. He'd been gathering herbs near a logging camp when the screaming started. Men's voices raw with panic, calling for help. He ran toward the sound. William Hayes lay pinned beneath a massive pine, his right leg crushed bone, visible through torn flesh. The smell of infection already hung in the air, sweet and rotten. The foreman stood helpless, knowing the nearest doctor was 40 miles away in Red Creek, knowing Hayes would be dead long before they got him there. Jack assessed the situation with the cold clarity Anna had taught him. 2 options: amputate the leg immediately, giving Hayes a 50% chance of survival, or try to save the limb and watch gangrene claim him within 48 hours. Hayes regained consciousness, eyes wild with pain. He looked up at Jack, a stranger in weathered buckskins, and whispered through gritted teeth, "Please, I have 3 daughters. A son, please. Jack saw not a wealthy businessman but a desperate father. He made his decision. I'll save you, but you do exactly what I say. No questions, no arguments. Hayes nodded. What followed was 3 weeks of hell. Jack moved into the Hayes cabin, tending William around the clock. He used medicines Anna had left him, rare herbs that had taken a decade to accumulate. He fought the infection with golden seal, echinacea, wild oregano, changed bandages 6 times a day, slept in 3-hour intervals, always listening for the rasp of fever breathing. Slowly and possibly, the infection retreated. The leg was saved. On the 21st day, William sat up in bed, color returned to his face. He looked at Jack with something like reverence. You saved my life, my family. I owe you a debt I can never repay. Jack, uncomfortable with gratitude, shook his head. You don't owe me anything. This is what I do. But William was a man who understood obligations, who lived by codes of honor Jack was only beginning to relearn. No, a man must pay his debts. Tell me what you need, anything. Jack wanted to refuse, but looking at William's face, seeing the desperation to make things right, he relented. If you need to repay me, leave the debt open. Someday if I need something, I'll ask. They shook hands. The deal was sealed. Jack rode back to his mountain thinking he'd never collect. It was a kindness, he told himself, letting William keep his dignity without actually demanding payment. That he would tell Thomas 40 years later was his first mistake. The second came 5 years later, in the autumn of 1885. Jack was 38 by then, living alone 8 years since Anna's death. His practice had grown beyond anything he'd anticipated. Patients traveled from 3 territories seeking his help. He spent 16 hours a day gathering herbs, preparing medicines, treating the sick and injured. There was no time to maintain the cabin, preserve food for winter, or do the 100 other tasks required to survive in the high country. He'd tried taking apprentices before. 2 young women, both capable, both hardworking. The first lasted 5 months before the isolation broke her. The second endured 1 winter before deciding she wanted a different life. Jack couldn't blame them. The loneliness was crushing, the work was brutal, and obligation alone wasn't enough to keep someone when every fiber of their being screamed to leave. In late September, Jack collapsed from exhaustion. He woke 18 hours later, body aching, head pounding, and realized with cold clarity, if he continued like this, he would die. And when he died, hundreds of people would lose their only access to medical care. Anna's voice whispered in his memory, "You cannot save others if you are dead." He needed help, real help, someone with genuine obligation, not just good intentions. His thoughts turned to William Hayes and the debt. For 3 days, Jack wrestled with himself. He'd sworn never to make another person into property, but was asking for help the same thing if he gave them a choice, if he made the terms clear, if he offered fair exchange for labor. Was that really the same as what had been done to him? The rationalizations came easily, too easily. He needed to survive to help others. The greater good required compromise. He would give them choice, which made it different. Deep down in the place he tried not to examine, Jack knew he was lying to himself. But he saddled his horse anyway. The ride down to Ashford Creek took 6 hours. Jack arrived at the Hayes timber mill just before sunset, finding William in his office reviewing ledgers. The older man looked up surprised and pleased. "Jack Stone, this is unexpected. What brings you down from your mountain?" Jack stood in the doorway, hat in hands. "I've come to collect the debt." William's expression shifted immediately. He stood close, the ledger, gave Jack his full attention. "Name it, money, timber, land." "None of those. I need a worker, an apprentice." William frowned, not understanding. "I can pay someone to work for you, whatever wage you name." "No, not hired help. I need someone with real obligation. Someone who won't quit when the work gets hard or the winter gets long." The words tasted like ash in Jack's mouth, but he continued. "I need someone bound by debt, not wages." William's frown deepened. He was a smart man, and he understood what Jack was really asking. "You want someone who has no choice but to stay." Jack met his eyes. "I want someone who understands the seriousness of the commitment, who won't leave patients without care because they're lonely or tired." William walked to the window, looking out at the mill yard where men were loading timber onto wagons. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "My son Daniel is married, running the business with me, but my youngest daughter, Emma, He paused, and something in that pause made Jack's instincts prickle with warning. She's 23, unmarried, lives with Daniel and his wife. She's strong, hardworking, would make a good apprentice. Jack's suspicions sharpened. Why are you willing to send her? William didn't turn from the window. She would have a better life on the mountain. The non-answer was answer enough, but Jack, desperate and compromised, didn't push. Make it proper, William continued. Call it a marriage. Protects her reputation and yours. But I understand it's really a work contract. Jack's stomach turned. He'd come asking for an apprentice and was being offered a wife. The two things shouldn't be confused, but William was right about one thing: the town would crucify an unmarried woman living alone with a man in the wilderness. I don't need a wife, I need a worker. I know, but the arrangement needs the appearance of marriage. Otherwise, Emma will be ruined in this town's eyes. Jack wanted to walk away. Every instinct Anna had taught him screamed that this was wrong. But he thought of the patients who needed him, the mothers with sick children, the minors with injuries, the elderly with no one else to turn to. He thought of dying alone on his mountain while people suffered. Fine, a ceremony, but I explained the real terms to her directly. If she refuses, the debt remains between you and me. I won't force anyone against their will. William nodded, relief evident. I'll arrange it for tomorrow. Jack rode back to his mountain that night, not sleeping, arguing with himself and Anna's ghost until dawn. The next day he returned for the wedding. The church in Ashford Creek was small, built from pine logs that still wept sap in summer heat. Today in late autumn chill, it smelled of old wood and judgment. Sunlight slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted like tiny witnesses. Jack arrived late deliberately. He'd spent the morning trying to convince himself not to go through with this. But the patients' faces haunted him. The children with fever, the men with crushed limbs, the women bleeding in childbirth. He needed help. This was the only way to get it. The lies we tell ourselves, he thought bitterly. He pushed open the church doors. The hinges screamed in protest. Conversation died instantly. Every head turned. Jack walked down the aisle, boots echoing on worn floorboards. He saw the congregation's faces: curiosity, pity, disgust. He was the mountain hermit, the strange man who lived with plants and spoke to no one. Of course they stared, but Jack's attention fixed on the woman at the altar. Emma Hayes stood beside her father, wearing a dress that didn't fit. It pulled tight across her shoulders and hips, straining at the seams. She was a large woman, heavy-set in a way that this town clearly judged harshly. Her brown hair was pulled back severely. Her face was flushed with humiliation. But her eyes burned with fury and trapped rage. They were the eyes of a caged animal, and Jack recognized that look because he'd seen it in his own reflection when he was 18 years old, bound by contract he hadn't chosen. In that moment, looking at Emma's face, Jack understood with perfect clarity he was doing to her exactly what had been done to him. His steps faltered. He almost turned and walked out. But William was watching. The congregation was watching. And Jack cowered that he was kept walking. Reverend Walsh began the ceremony. We are gathered here to join, Jack interrupted. Stop. The word cut through the church like a blade. Gasps rippled through the pews. Jack walked to the altar, ignoring protocol, ignoring propriety. He looked at William. Did you tell her? William's face hardened. Tell her what? About the arrangement, about her choice. She knows it's her duty. The word duty made Jack's jaw clench. He'd heard that word used to justify every cruelty of his youth. He turned to face the congregation. This isn't a marriage. It's a contract. More gasps. Someone in the back whispered a prayer. Jack continued, voice hard and clear. William Hayes owes me a debt for saving his life 5 years ago. I've come to collect. I need help on my mountain. An apprentice to learn healing, maintain the homestead, work beside me through winter. He looked at Emma directly for the first time. I didn't ask for a wife. I asked for a worker. Your father insisted on calling it marriage for the sake of propriety. But the truth is this: I need someone strong enough to survive mountain winters and smart enough to learn medicine. In exchange, I offer shelter, food protection, and training in skills that have value. Emma's eyes widened slightly. This clearly wasn't what she'd been told. Jack took a breath, feeling the weight of what came next. But here's what your father didn't tell you. The choice is yours. The church erupted. William grabbed Emma's arm, started to speak, but Jack's hand closed on William's wrist. Not threatening, just firm. "Let go, now!" William released her. Jack addressed Emma again, speaking only to her, though his voice carried to every corner of the church. "I'll be honest. The work is hard. The mountain doesn't forgive weakness or foolishness. You'll learn to gather herbs, prepare medicines, treat the sick and injured. You'll keep the cabin, tend the garden, preserve food for winter. The isolation breaks most people." He paused, making sure she heard every word. "In return, you get shelter, food, and knowledge that can feed you for life. But we maintain clear boundaries. Separate rooms. This is a work arrangement, not a marriage bed. I won't touch you that way. That's my word." Emma's eyes searched his face, looking for the law of the trap. Jack continued, "If you refuse, you stay here. Your father's debt is between him and his conscience. I will not drag anyone into the wilderness against their will. The choice is yours, and yours alone." William's face had gone purple with rage. "You can't just—" "I can, and I have." Jack turned back to Emma, waiting. The silence stretched like pulled wire ready to snap. Emma looked at her father. At her brother Daniel in the front pew, arms crossed, face hard. At Daniel's wife whispering behind her fan. At the congregation, their eyes full of pity and contempt. Then she looked at Jack again, really looked, and something in his scarred, weathered face must have convinced her he meant what he said. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than he expected. "Show me everything." Jack frowned, not understanding. "What? You want to see if I can work. I want to see what this arrangement really is. No pretense, no hiding. You show me the truth, I'll show you the truth." She straightened her shoulders, and the movement split a seam in the too-tight dress. She didn't seem to notice or care. "I can work. I'm stronger than I look, and I won't quit." Jack felt something shift in his chest. Respect, maybe, or recognition. This woman wasn't a victim making the best of bad options. She was a fighter choosing her battlefield. He nodded once. "Deal." He turned to William. "The debt is settled. She comes of her own free will, not by your command." Then he looked at Reverend Walsh. "Make a record. Emma Hayes enters my service by choice. Whatever debts existed are concluded." The Reverend, flustered and uncertain, scribbled in the church ledger. Jack addressed Emma one final time. "Get your things. We leave within the hour. The trail gets dangerous after dark." She handed the dying bouquet to her father, who took it automatically, confusion replacing anger on his face. Then she walked down the aisle, the congregation parting before her like she carried plague. Jack followed, aware of every eye tracking his movement, every whispered judgment. Outside, the autumn afternoon was bright and cold. Emma walked to her brother's house without looking back, climbed the stairs to a small room, and packed her life into a single carpet bag. 2 dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, a book of pressed flowers, her mother's shawl. She was downstairs again in 15 minutes. Jack waited by a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses. He took her bag without comment, secured it in the back where supplies were already loaded. Sacks of flour, cornmeal, crates of canned goods, coils of rope, bundles of fabric. "You'll need better boots." He glanced at her worn shoes. "And warmer clothes. We'll stop at the general store." They did. The shopkeeper watched with wide eyes as Jack selected sturdy leather boots, wool stockings, 2 heavy skirts, 3 work shirts, a warm coat, and a wide-brimmed hat. He paid in cash, more money than Emma had seen in months, and handed her the parcels. "Change into the boots now. Your feet will thank you later." Emma did right there in the store, past caring about propriety. The boots felt strange and heavy, but they fit well. A small crowd had gathered outside. Emma saw faces she'd known all her life, but none spoke. They just watched as Jack helped her onto the wagon seat, his hand firm and impersonal under her elbow, then climbed up beside her. He clicked his tongue. The horses moved forward. Emma didn't look back. The road out of Ashford Creek followed the river valley for the first hour, winding between fields newly planted with winter wheat. The mountains rose ahead, still capped with its snow despite the autumn warmth. The higher peaks disappeared into clouds. Jack drove in silence, and Emma sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, questions tumbling through her mind. But she didn't know how to ask them, didn't know if she was allowed. Finally, as the road narrowed to a trail and the trees closed in around them, Jack spoke. "You'll be wondering about the arrangement." "Yes," his voice was matter-of-fact, like discussing weather. "It's simple. I need help. The work has grown beyond what one person can manage. People come from 3 territories seeking treatment. I spend half my time gathering and preparing supplies, the other half tending patients. There's no time for maintaining the cabin, preserving food, managing the basics of living. He kept his eyes on the trail. Your father offered you in trade. I accepted because I needed reliable help, and he needed his conscience cleared. But I gave you choice because I know what it's like to have none. Emma absorbed this, watching the landscape change around them. Lower elevations giving way to higher, the air growing thinner and colder. You could have hired someone. I tried, twice. Mountain work is hard. Most people don't last a winter. They get lonely or scared, or they realize living without town comforts is harder than they thought. He glanced at her. A debt creates obligation. Obligation creates persistence. Your father's debt is settled now, but I'm hoping you'll find reasons of your own to stay. What kind of reasons? Useful ones. Pride in work well done. Satisfaction in healing. The peace that comes from being needed rather than tolerated. The trail steepened. The horses leaned into their harness. But that's for you to discover. I won't beg you to stay, and I won't stop you from leaving if you choose to go. Emma thought about that, about choice, about the fact that this stranger had given her more autonomy in one afternoon than her family had in 23 years. I'll stay. You haven't seen the cabin yet. Doesn't matter. I'll stay. Jack nodded once as if that settled something important. They climbed higher. The trail switched back and forth across the mountainside, rising above the tree line and then dropping back into dense forest. Emma saw deer watching from shadows, and once a black bear that ambled across the path ahead before disappearing into undergrowth. The air grew thin. Emma's breath came shorter. We're at 7,000 feet, Jack said, seeing her struggle. Your body will adjust in a few days. The sun was setting when they finally reached the cabin. It sat in a high meadow ringed by pine and aspen, with a stream running along one side and mountains rising on all sides like protective walls. The cabin itself was larger than Emma had expected, built from heavy logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch. Nearby stood a barn, a smokehouse, and what looked like a workshop with its door propped open. Jack stopped the wagon. Home. Emma climbed down, legs stiff from the long ride. The meadow grass was thick with wildflowers even this late in the season. Lupine, columbine, Indian paintbrush. The stream made constant, gentle music. The air smelled of pine and snow and something clean she couldn't name. It was the most beautiful place she'd ever seen. Cabin has 2 rooms, Jack said, unhitching the horses. You get the bedroom. I sleep in the workroom where I can hear if someone comes needing help at night. That's not necessary. He cut her off. It is. This arrangement works only if boundaries are clear. You're here to work and learn, not share my bed. Privacy protects us both. Relief flooded through Emma, though she hadn't realized she'd been afraid until the fear released. They unloaded the wagon together, carrying supplies into the cabin and barn. Inside the cabin was spare but well kept. The main room held a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with jars and bottles. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters. Everything had purpose. Nothing was wasted. The bedroom was small, just a bed, chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the meadow. Clean and simple. I'll make supper, Jack said. You should rest. Tomorrow, the real work begins. But Emma shook her head. Show me the kitchen. I'll help. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. All right. They worked side by side in comfortable silence. Jack showed her where things were kept, how the stove worked, how to draw water from the pump that connected to the stream. They made a simple meal: fried salt pork, beans, cornbread. Emma hadn't cooked in a real kitchen in years, having been relegated to scullery work at her brother's house. She found herself relaxing into familiar rhythms. They ate at the table as darkness fell outside. Through the window, stars emerged in numbers. Emma had never seen the sky black and deep and endless. No church bells up here, Jack said, following her gaze. No gossip, no judgment, just work and weather and whatever you make of yourself. It's quiet. Too quiet for some. We'll see if it suits you. After supper, Jack lit a lamp and pulled a leather-bound journal from the shelf. This is where I keep records. Patients, treatments, what works and what doesn't. You'll need to learn to read it, add to it. Can you write? Yes, my mother taught me before she died. Good. He opened the journal and Emma saw three different handwritings, one delicate and flowing, one bold and angular, one careful and precise. Tomorrow I start teaching you the plants. There are over 100 medicinal species within a day's walk of here. You'll need to know them all, what they look like, where they grow, when to harvest, how to prepare them. Emma felt a flutter of something she'd almost forgotten. Excitement, anticipation. I'm a quick study. We'll find out. Jack stood stretching. Get some sleep. We start at dawn. Emma washed the dishes, banked the fire, and retreated to the bedroom. The bed was firm, the quilts thick and warm. She lay in the darkness, listening to unfamiliar sounds wind in the pines. The stream's constant murmur, an owl calling somewhere close. She thought about the church, the faces watching the humiliation of standing before them all, like goods at auction. Then she thought about Jack's words. Show me everything. For the first time in her life, someone had asked for her truth instead of her apology. Emma pulled the quilts closer and closed her eyes. Outside, the mountain stood watch under a blanket of stars, and somewhere in the workroom, Jack Stone lay awake, wondering what he'd truly begun. Dawn came cold and bright. Emma woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. She dressed quickly in her new work clothes and found Jack already at the table reading his journal and drinking from a tin cup. Coffee's on the stove. There's oatmeal in the pot. Emma served herself and sat down. The coffee was strong and bitter, nothing like the weak tea her sister-in-law served. It woke her completely. Jack closed the journal. Today you learn the basics, how to identify the most common medicinal plants, where to find them, what parts to harvest. We'll start in the meadow and work our way into the forest. All right. Some rules first. He ticked them off on his fingers. One never harvests without being certain of identification. Some helpful plants have poisonous twins. Two never take more than a third of any plant population. We depend on them regrowing. Three, everything you learn you write down. I won't always be here to remind you. And four, if you don't know, say so. Guessing kills people. Emma nodded, the weight of responsibility settling over her. They spent the morning in the meadow. Jack moved slowly, deliberately kneeling beside plants and explaining their properties. Yarrow for bleeding and fever. Arnica for bruises and muscle pain. St. John's wort for melancholy. Mullein for coughs. He showed her how to recognize them by leaf shape, flower structure, even smell. Touch this. He crushed a leaf between his fingers and held it out. Emma inhaled, mint sharp and clean. Wild bergamot, good for digestion, for calming nerves. He pointed to a similar plant nearby. That's catnip, also calming but works differently. You see the difference in the leaves? Emma looked closely. The serrations were sharper on one, the color slightly different. Yes. Good. Now tell me tomorrow which is which. They worked until noon when the sun was high and hot. Jack led her back to the cabin where they ate bread and cheese and drank cool water from the stream. Then they headed into the forest. Here the plants changed. Ferns grew thick in shade. Wild ginger spread across the forest floor. Jack showed her golden seal ginseng black cohosh plants that took years to grow and commanded high prices in trade. We harvest these sparingly, he said, and we always plant the seeds back. My teacher taught me that. These mountains provide, but only if we respect them. Who was your teacher? A woman named Anna Redbird, Shoshone. She found me half dead from fever 15 years ago and nursed me back. Taught me everything she knew about healing. His expression softened with memory. She's gone now, but her knowledge lives on. Emma filed that information away, understanding she was being entrusted with something precious, a lineage of knowledge passed down through generations. By late afternoon, her head was spinning with information. Jack seemed to sense it. Enough for today. Tomorrow we'll review, and you'll start preparing simple tinctures. They walked back to the cabin. Emma's feet ached in the new boots, and her back protested from all the bending and kneeling. But there was satisfaction in the tiredness, a sense of accomplishment she'd never felt from endless household drudgery. That evening after supper, Jack pulled out the journal again. Write down what you learned today. Everything you can remember. Emma took the pen, dipped it in ink, and began writing. Plant names, descriptions, uses. Her handwriting was neat but unpracticed. She had to ask Jack several times for correct spellings, but she filled 2 pages before setting the pen down. Jack read over her work, nodding. Good, detailed, keep this up. The praise was minimal, but Emma felt it warm her chest. The days developed a rhythm. Each morning they explored different terrain, high alpine meadows, dense forest, rocky slopes where hardy plants clung to life in shallow soil. Jack taught her to see what she'd walked past her whole life without noticing, how to read the landscape, understand which plants grew where and why. 3 weeks in, Emma was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard horses approaching. She stood shading her eyes and saw 3 riders emerging from the forest trail. Jack came out of the workshop wiping his hands on a rag. Trouble. Get water boiling. Prepare the examination room. Emma hurried inside, stoking the fire and filling the kettle. The examination room was really just a corner of the main cabin, partitioned off with curtains, but it held a sturdy table, good light from the window, and shelves stocked with everything Jack might need. The riders dismounted. Through the window, Emma saw a young woman being helped down, pale as milk blood, staining her skirt. Jack supported her as they came inside. Help me get her on the table. Together they lifted the girl. She was light, too light, and laid her down. Her eyes were glassy with pain and fear. What happened? Jack asked the men who'd accompanied her. Miscarriage, the older one said, hat in hands. Started bleeding 3 days ago. We rode from the logging camp as fast as we could. 3 days, Jack's voice was sharp. Why didn't you come sooner? She didn't want to worry nobody, said it would pass. Jack muttered something under his breath, then turned to Emma. I need you here. She's lost too much blood and there may be retained tissue. I'll have to examine her, possibly extract manually. She'll need a woman's presence. Emma swallowed hard. What do you need me to do? Hold her hand. Keep her calm. If she gets agitated, she'll bleed more. He was already rolling up his sleeves, scrubbing his hands with harsh lye soap. Talk to her. Keep her present. Emma moved to the head of the table. The girl's eyes found hers, terrified, pleading. What's your name? Emma asked gently. Sarah. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm Emma. You're safe now, Sarah. Jack is the best healer in 3 territories. He's going to help you. Jack examined her with quick, practiced efficiency. His face remained neutral, but Emma saw tension in his shoulders. There's retained tissue. I need to remove it or the bleeding won't stop. He looked at Sarah. This is going to hurt. I'm sorry. Sarah's hand clamped down on Emma's with surprising strength. What followed was the longest hour of Emma's life. Jack worked with absolute focus, his movements precise despite the blood and Sarah's cries. Emma held the girl's hand, wiped her forehead, murmured reassurances that felt inadequate against such pain. She watched Jack's face, saw the concentration, the careful gentleness, even in the midst of necessary brutality. Finally, he stepped back. It's done. The bleeding should slow now. Emma helped clean Sarah while Jack prepared a tincture, shepherd's purse for bleeding cramp bark, for pain yarrow, for infection. Sarah drank it obediently, her face gray with exhaustion. She needs to stay here, Jack told the men when they were called back in. At least a week, maybe 2. She's not strong enough to travel. We can't, the younger man started, but the older cut him off. We'll pay whatever you ask. I don't want payment. I want you to tell every woman in that camp that if this happens again, they come immediately. Not in 3 days, immediately. You understand, ah? The older man nodded, chastened. They left after securing Sarah's few belongings. Jack carried her to his bedroom and settled her there with extra blankets. You'll sleep in the workroom, he told Emma. I'll take the chair out here so I can hear if she needs anything in the night. For the next week, Emma learned a different kind of healing. The plants and tinctures could only do so much. The rest was presence, bringing Sarah broth when she could stomach it, changing blood-soaked linens without flinching, sitting beside her in the long hours when fear and grief rose up like floodwaters. Sarah had been married 4 months. The baby would have been her first. She cried, sometimes quiet tears that soaked the pillow. Emma held her hand and said nothing, understanding that some pain had no comfort. When Sarah was finally strong enough to travel, her young husband came to collect her. He was barely 20, with worried eyes and gentle hands as he helped her onto the horse. Thank you, he said to Jack. Both of you, I don't know how to repay. Take care of her, Jack said. That's payment enough. They watched the couple ride away, Sarah looking back once to wave. You did well with her, Jack said to Emma when they were gone. I didn't do anything. You're the one who saved her life. I stopped the bleeding. You gave her reason to want to live. That matters just as much. The praise, small as it was, glowed warm in Emma's chest. October brought its own challenges, and with them a visitor from higher up the mountain. An emergency call sent Jack and Emma riding to a cabin Emma hadn't known existed tucked against a cliff face at an elevation that left her breathless. Margaret lived there alone, a tiny woman bent with age but sharp-eyed as a hawk. She greeted them with a mixture of irritation and relief. "About time you showed up, Jack Stone. I've been waiting 3 weeks. You could have come down, Margaret, and leave my home for some sterile cabin in the valley. I'd rather die up here, and you know it." Her gaze shifted to Emma, assessing. "Who's this, my apprentice?" "Emma Hayes." Margaret looked her up and down with an intensity that reminded Emma uncomfortably of Jack's first examination. "She's bigger than the last one. That's good. The work needs strength." Emma blinked. "The last one," Margaret cheerfully continued as if Emma hadn't spoken, "had two before you. Both ran off before the first snow. Too lonely, they said. Too hard." She turned back to her cabin. "Come on, then. Might as well get to work." On the ride back down after treating Margaret's arthritis with a tincture of devil's claw and willow bark, Emma finally asked the question. "You had other apprentices?" Jack kept his eyes on the trail. "Two. First lasted 5 months. Missed her family too much. Second made it through one winter, decided she wanted a different life. Can't fault either for knowing their limits." "Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed anything?" Emma considered. "No, I suppose not." "Then there was no need." He glanced at her. "I don't expect you to stay forever, Emma. This life isn't for everyone. But while you're here, I expect you to give it everything you have." "I will. I know, that's why you're still here." They rode in silence for a while, the horses picking their way carefully down the steep trail. Emma thought about the two women who'd come before her, who'd learned these same plants, walked these same trails, and ultimately chosen to leave. She wondered what it said about her, that she had no desire to follow them. The valley spread below green and gold in the afternoon light. Behind them, the mountains rose eternal peaks, already gathering the season's first serious snow. "One more thing," Jack said as they neared home. "Those other apprentices, they had skills. They were smart, capable women. But they didn't have what you have. What's that? Stubbornness, grit, the kind of determination that doesn't break when things get hard." He looked at her directly. "You remind me of someone." "Who can?" "Me." It wasn't a compliment exactly, but coming from Jack Stone, a man who gave praise as rarely as mountain peaks gave shelter, it meant something. Emma smiled and didn't reply, but warmth settled in her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. As they rode into the meadow, the cabin's chimney trailing smoke into the autumn sky, Emma realized something had shifted. She'd stopped thinking of this as temporary, stopped planning her eventual return to Ashford Creek. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, the mountain had stopped being exile and started being home. Jack must have sensed it too, because as they dismounted and began unsaddling the horses, he spoke again. "First snow will come soon. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3. After that, we'll be cut off until spring. No going back if you change your mind. No visitors except in emergencies. Just you and me and whatever we can make of the winter." He paused, checking the cinch on his saddle. Last chance to reconsider. Emma looked at the cabin, the meadow, the mountains rising on all sides. She thought about Ashford Creek, her brother's house, the life she'd left behind. Then she thought about Sarah's grateful tears, the satisfaction of correctly identifying a difficult plant, the quiet pride in Jack's eyes when she did something well. "I'm not going anywhere." Jack nodded once, as if that settled it. And maybe it did. The fire had burned lower while Jack spoke, and Thomas rose to add another log. The wood caught quickly, flames licking upward, casting new shadows across the old man's weathered face. Thomas settled back into his chair, pen poised over his notebook, though he'd stopped writing pages ago. Some stories demanded full attention. "Mr. Stone," he said carefully. "Did you love her, Emma, I mean?" Jack's eyes remained fixed on the fire. "That's a complicated question, son. At what point the first month numb? After 3 months, maybe starting to. When her brother came to take her back, absolutely." He shifted in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "But I didn't admit it even to myself. That's the part that nearly cost me everything." Thomas leaned forward. "What happened?" Jack's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked every one of his 78 years. Men of my generation were taught certain things. Don't show weakness. Don't show emotion. Keep walls up. Stay strong. He looked at Thomas directly. That's bullshit. The young man's eyes widened slightly at the profanity. It's bullshit because those walls nearly cost me everything. Nearly cost Emma her life. And it definitely made what came next harder than it needed to be. He took a breath, settled deeper into his chair. October of 1885. Emma had been with me 6 weeks. She'd learned faster than I'd expected, proven herself more capable than the 2 apprentices before her. But more than that, she'd become. He paused, searching for the right word. Essential. The cabin felt right when she was there. Wrong when she wasn't. I told myself it was just efficiency, partnership, the satisfaction of working with someone competent. His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. I was lying to myself again. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. And then her brother came. Thomas wrote that down, underlining it twice. Jack closed his eyes, seeing not the present cabin, but one from 40 years past, and Emma in the garden, and 3 riders emerging from the forest trail. The memory pulled him under like a riptide. It was early October, the aspens turning gold, and the first frost already killing back the tender plants. Jack was in the workshop preparing winter medicines, grinding dried roots into powder, when he heard Emma's voice outside. Not alarmed exactly, but different. Alert. He set down the mortar and pestle, wiped his hands, and stepped into the afternoon light. 3 men on horseback at the edge of the meadow. Jack's hand went instinctively to the rifle prop near the workshop door, though he didn't pick it up. Not yet. The lead rider dismounted, and Jack recognized him immediately from the church, Daniel Hayes, Emma's brother. Older, harder face, dressed in town clothes that looked absurd in the wilderness. 2 men flanked him, professional thugs by the look of them, thick-shouldered and cold-eyed. Jack moved to stand near Emma, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. A statement without words. Daniel's eyes tracked the movement, and his mouth tightened. I'm here to collect my sister. Jack kept his voice level, showing nothing. She's not your property to collect. Actually, about that, Daniel pulled a document from his coat, unfolded it with deliberate care. This is a deed properly notarized showing that Medicine Peak Valley and all structures thereon belong to the Hayes Family Trust, have for 30 years. He held it up like evidence in a trial, which means you've been squatting on Hayes land, and my sister has been working without compensation on property that rightfully belongs to our family. Jack took the document, read it slowly. His heart sank even as his face remained neutral. The deed was a forgery, he was certain of, that having worked in the surveyor's office long enough to recognize the telltale signs. But it was a good forgery, good enough to fool most judges. This is falsified. Daniel's smile was all teeth. That's a serious accusation. You prepared to make it before a territorial judge, if necessary. Good, because Judge Morrison is in Red Creek right now hearing cases. We can ride down today, settle this legal and proper. Daniel's eyes glittered with something that looked like triumph. Of course, if you can't prove your claim, you'll lose everything. The cabin, the land you practice, all of it. I'll make sure every supplier in 3 territories knows you're a fraud and a squatter. No one will sell you medicine. No patients will come. You'll be finished. Jack's mind raced through options, none of them good. A court battle would take months, cost money he didn't have. Even if he won, eventually the damage to his reputation would be done. Patients would die while he fought legal battles. Emma stood silent beside him, and Jack could feel her tension like a physical thing. Daniel continued, his voice taking on a tone of false reasonableness. Or there's a simple solution. Emma comes back to Ashford Creek. We tell everyone she was confused, coerced, that you took advantage of Father's desperation and her innocence. She stays with us, behaves properly, and maybe in a year or 2 we find her a suitable husband. He paused, letting that sink in. You keep your land, your practice, everyone wins. Except Emma. Emma will do what's best for the family name. Won't you, sister? Emma said nothing, but Jack felt her shift beside him, gathering herself for battle. Daniel's expression hardened. You have 1 hour to decide. Pack your things, Emma, or we ride to Red Creek and file a complaint. Your choice, Wyatt. Jack turned to Emma. We need to talk, inside. They walked into the cabin, and the moment the door closed, Jack spoke. You need to go with him. Emma's eyes flashed with fury. No! Emma, listen to me. This isn't about pride or stubbornness. If you stay, he destroys everything. The practice, the patience who depend on this place. I can't let one person's choice ruin it for everyone. I'm not one person. I'm your apprentice, your partner in this work. Jack's voice turned hard, desperate. You're a woman who deserves better than being trapped by a man's vendetta. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for this. For me. And there it was, the truth he'd been avoiding. It wasn't just about the practice. It was about Emma, about keeping her safe, about not being the reason she suffered. Emma stepped closer, and her voice shook with an emotion Jack couldn't quite name. You don't get to decide that. You don't get to send me away for my own good, like I'm a child who can't understand consequences. Her hands clenched into fists. I've spent my whole life being told what I can't do, what I can't handle, what I'm not strong enough for. I won't hear it from you. This is different. It's not different, it's the same thing wearing a different face. She moved closer, still forcing him to meet her eyes. My brother wants to control me with threats. You want to protect me with sacrifice. Both of you think you know better than I do what I can endure. Jack opened his mouth to argue, but Emma wasn't finished. I've worked beside you for 6 weeks. I've learned to identify 100 medicinal plants. I've assisted with surgeries, treated fevers, helped save Sarah's life. I've lived through storms and silence and every hardship these mountains threw at me. Her voice rose fierce and unbreakable. And I'm still here, still standing, still choosing this life every single day. I'm not leaving, not for my brother's pride, not for your protection. This is my home. This work is mine, and I'll be damned if I let Daniel Hayes take it from me. Jack stared at her, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted in his understanding. This woman standing before him wasn't a victim needing rescue. She wasn't property to be traded or protected. She was a warrior choosing her battlefield. Respect hit him like a physical blow, fierce and absolute. All right, then we fight. Emma's expression changed from fury to surprise. How you said yourself, a court battle takes months. Jack moved to the shelves, pulled out old documents he'd kept from his surveyor days. Daniel's deed is a forgery, but it's good, which means he had access to original territorial survey documents. That access leaves a trail: bribery, falsified records, conspiracy. He spread the papers on the table. Before Anna found me, I worked for the Territorial Surveyor's Office. I know how these documents are created, filed, what makes them legitimate, and I still have contacts in Red Creek. Understanding dawned on Emma's face. We can prove he's lying. We can try, but we need time, and Daniel's not going to give us that willingly. Jack looked at her carefully. How good are you at acting? Emma's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I mean, we need to buy time. Make him think he's won while we gather proof. Jack outlined the plan quickly. Emma would pretend to agree, ask for a few days to pack and say goodbye. Daniel would wait because he cared more about appearances than truth always had. Meanwhile, Jack and Emma would ride to Red Creek by the back trail, talk to his contact at the surveyor's office, get the original documents, and expose the forgery. Emma listened, nodding slowly. He'll believe it if I seem defeated enough. Can you do that? Seem defeated? Something flickered across Emma's face, old pain briefly surfacing. I spent 23 years pretending to be smaller than I was. Yes, I can do it. They walked back outside together. Daniel stood by his horse, arms crossed, the hired thugs flanking him like bookends. Emma let her shoulders slump, her voice going small and hollow. I'll go with you. Daniel's eyebrows rose, suspicion warring with satisfaction. Just like that. But I need 3 days. To gather my things, say goodbye properly. You owe me that much. Jack watched Daniel calculate weighing options. The man had always cared more about optics than reality, about how things looked rather than how they were. Emma continued, her voice breaking convincingly. Because if you drag me down the mountain like a prisoner, everyone will know what this really is. But if I come willingly, if I tell people I realize my mistake, that I'm grateful you came to bring me home. She paused, letting tears gather in her eyes. Then your story works. Otherwise, it's just another Hayes family scandal. Daniel's face shifted as he processed this. Jack could almost see the man's mind working, imagining the gossip, the whispers, the damage to his reputation versus the triumph of bringing his sister home peacefully. 3 days. We'll camp by the river. But if you try to run, if Stone tries anything, I burn this place to the ground and salt the earth. Understood. Emma whispered, head bowed. Understood. Daniel mounted his horse, his men following suit. 3 days, Emma. Don't make me come back up here. They rode out, disappearing into the trees. Jack and Emma stood in silence until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then Emma's posture straightened, the defeated act falling away like a discarded coat. That was impressive, Jack said quietly. That was survival. Now what's the real plan? Jack was already moving, mind racing ahead. We ride to Red Creek tonight, back way over the ridge. It's steep and dangerous, especially in the dark, but it cuts 2 hours off the trip and avoids Daniel's camp completely. He headed for the barn. Pack light, food, water, warm clothes. We leave as soon as the sun sets. They prepared in focused silence, moving with the efficiency of months working together. Jack gathered the original survey documents. Anna had kept proof of his homestead claim. Emma packed provisions, filled canteens, laid out heavy coats. As the sun touched the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they saddled the horses. Jack checked the cinch on Emma's saddle, tested the stirrups. This trail is no joke. Narrow, steep, with drop-offs that'll kill you if your horse stumbles. Keep your eyes forward, trust your mount's instincts, and for God's sake, don't look down. Emma swung into the saddle, her face set with determination. I trust you, and I trust my horse. Let's go. They rode out as darkness fell, taking the narrow trail that led not down, but up, climbing toward the ridge that separated Medicine Peak Valley from the eastern slopes. The trail was everything Jack had warned and worse. It switchbacked up the mountainside, barely wide enough for a single horse, with sheer rock face on one side and empty air on the other. The moon had not yet risen, and they climbed in near darkness, relying on the horse's sure-footedness and Jack's memory of a trail he'd ridden maybe twice in 15 years. Behind him, Jack heard Emma's steady breathing, the creak of leather, the careful placement of hooves on stone. She didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, didn't question the route, just followed, trusting him to lead them safely. That trust felt heavier than any responsibility he had ever carried. They reached the ridge at midnight. The view stole breath, even in darkness, mountains stretching endlessly in all directions, peaks silver under emerging starlight valleys, black as secrets below. The wind howled up here, cold and fierce, reminding them how small humans were against this landscape. Jack dismounted, let his horse blow, and rest. 10 minutes. Let them catch their breath. Emma slid down from her saddle legs, shaking slightly from hours of tension. They stood together in the wind, passing a canteen back and forth, not speaking. Jack studied her profile in the starlight. Exhausted, windblown, pushed to her limits, and still standing. Still ready to keep going. Something in his chest tightened, an emotion he couldn't name and didn't want to examine. We should keep moving, he said roughly. Descent is worse than the climb. He was right. The eastern slope was loose with scree, the horses slipping and scrambling for purchase. Once Emma's mount stumbled badly, and for a heart-stopping moment, Jack thought they'd both go over the edge. His hands shot out instinctively, grabbing for Emma's reins, even though she was too far away to reach. But her horse recovered, found its footing, and continued down through the darkness. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. The thought of Emma falling, dying because he'd led her on this insane ride. He pushed the thought away, focused on the trail. They reached the valley floor as dawn broke, tired and filthy, but whole. Red Creek was still 5 miles away, and they rode through it as the town woke, shopkeepers opening doors, children heading to school, the normal rhythms of civilization that felt foreign after months in the mountains. Jack led them to a modest house on the edge of town, dismounted, knocked. The door opened to reveal Thomas Brennan, middle-aged, balding, spectacled, with ink-stained fingers, and the cautious expression of a man who'd learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. His eyes widened in recognition. Jack Stone, I'll be damned. Heard you'd gone completely wild up there. Not completely, Thomas, but close. Jack gestured to Emma. This is my apprentice, Emma Hayes. Thomas's expression shifted at the name Hayes, something like understanding and concern crossing his face. Come inside, quickly. They followed him into a cluttered study packed with maps and documents, the organized chaos of a man who knew where everything was despite appearances. Thomas closed the door, turned to face them. Your brother was here 2 weeks ago, Emma, asking about land surveys for the Medicine Peak region. Emma's breath caught. Thomas continued pulling a ledger from his desk. I told him the documents were sealed, part of an ongoing boundary dispute. He offered me money to copy them anyway. Did you? Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. Hell no, but someone did. My assistant, probably. He's been living beyond his means lately. Thomas opened the ledger, showing pages of careful notations. I've been documenting irregularities ever since waiting for this to blow up. What do you need? Jack leaned forward. Original surveys for Medicine Peak and any records of who accessed them. Thomas moved to a safe in the corner, worked the combination, retrieved a locked box. Inside were yellowed documents, decades old, the original territorial surveys filed when Montana was first mapped and claimed. He spread them on his desk. According to this, Medicine Peak is unclaimed federal land available for homestead filing, but not owned by anyone currently. Never has been. Emma leaned in, studying the documents. Daniel claims it belongs to the Hayes Family Trust. Then Daniel is lying. There is no Hayes Family Trust in the territorial records. I checked when he first came asking. Thomas tapped the survey map. See, the nearest Hayes property is 15 miles south. Medicine Peak doesn't appear on any private land registry. Jack felt vindication rise in his chest, cold and certain. Can you testify to that? Gladly. Your brother's fraud, Thomas looked apologetically at Emma, undermines the integrity of my entire office. Judge Morrison takes that seriously. They left Thomas's house and headed for the courthouse, a sturdy brick building in the center of town. The courtroom was half full, locals curious about the day's proceedings. Jack saw Daniel in the front row, flanked by his hired men and a well-dressed lawyer. Daniel's expression when he spotted them was priceless shock, melting into fury, melting into forced calm. Jack noted the subtle signs. Daniel's left eye twitched, the tell he'd always had when lying or cornered. The man's hands gripped his chair arms too tightly. He'd expected Emma to fold, to come quietly. He hadn't planned for resistance. Judge Morrison entered and the courtroom rose. The judge was an older man with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, a frontier justice tempered by decades of dealing with men's lies and desperation. He rapped his gavel. Hayes versus Stone, territorial land dispute. Mr. Hayes, you're claiming ownership of the Medicine Peak property currently occupied by Mr. Stone. Daniel's lawyer stood smooth and confident. We are, Your Honor, based on a deed registered to the Hayes Family Trust in 1855. Morrison looked at Jack. And Mr. Stone disputes this claim. Jack stood, feeling every eye in the courtroom on him. I do, Your Honor. The deed is a forgery. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Morrison banged his gavel for silence. That's a serious allegation, Mr. Stone. Can you prove it? I can. Your Honor, I have the original territorial survey documents provided by the surveyor's office showing that Medicine Peak is unclaimed federal land. Additionally, I have testimony from the territorial surveyor himself regarding irregularities in document access. Morrison's eyebrows rose. Bailiff, bring Mr. Brennan forward. Thomas took the stand and explained everything with the calm precision of a man who dealt in facts, not emotions. The suspicious requests, the bribery attempt, the falsified records. He presented the original surveys, walking the judge through the technical details that proved Daniel's deed was fabricated. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, introduce doubts, suggest alternative explanations. But the evidence was overwhelming, the documentation too precise to dispute. Morrison studied the papers with increasing displeasure, his face hardening with each page. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Hayes, did you or did you not attempt to bribe a territorial official to access sealed land records? Daniel's face had gone red, veins visible at his temples. I simply requested information that I believed was yes or no, Mr. Hayes. The silence stretched. Jack could see Daniel calculating, weighing lies against consequences, trying to find an escape that didn't exist. I may have offered compensation for expedited service. Morrison's voice went cold. That's called bribery, Mr. Hayes, and falsifying land records is fraud. He looked at the bailiff. Take him into custody pending formal charges. The courtroom exploded. Daniel lunged forward, but his hired men grabbed him, holding him back as the bailiff approached with shackles. This isn't over, Daniel shouted, struggling against the restraints. You think you've won? You've destroyed our family name? Father will never forgive you. Emma stood and her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. I didn't destroy anything, Daniel. I just refused to be destroyed myself. There's a difference. But Daniel wasn't listening. As the bailiff led him toward the door, he turned back, face twisted with rage, and something that looked almost like genuine concern beneath the fury. You think you're honorable, Stone. You bought my sister, took her like property, like a slave trader collecting debts. You're no better than the men who owned you. The courtroom went silent. Jack felt the words hit like physical blows. Because Daniel was right. Not about the land, not about the fraud, but about this. About what Jack had done when he'd accepted Emma's payment. He could have let it pass. Could have let the bailiff drag Daniel away while the accusation hung unanswered. Could have claimed victory and walked out with his reputation intact. But Anna's voice whispered in his memory, "You choose what kind of man you become." Jack stood. "You're right." Shock rippled through the room. Even Morrison looked surprised. Jack continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "I took Emma as payment for a debt. I rationalized it as a contract, an arrangement, a fair exchange for labor. But the truth is I was making her into property the same way I was made property when I was 14 years old." He looked at Emma, saw her eyes widen. "I broke an oath I made to myself. I compromised my honor trying to preserve it. And that was wrong." The courtroom was utterly silent now, every person leaning forward to hear. "But Emma didn't let me keep her in that box. She chose this life every day, despite me, not because of me. She earned her place through skill and dedication and a stubborn refusal to be diminished by anyone's expectations." He turned back to the judge. "She's not my property. She's not my servant. She's my partner. In every way that word means. And that's why Daniel's deed is meaningless. Because even if he owned the land, he doesn't own her." Morrison studied Jack for a long moment, and something like respect flickered in the old judge's eyes. "Mr. Stone, that's the most honest thing I've heard in a courtroom in 30 years. Takes courage to admit wrongdoing publicly." He looked at Emma. "Miss Hayes, you are free to live wherever you choose. Your brother's claims have no legal standing." Then to the bailiff, "Remove the defendant. We'll schedule a hearing for the fraud charges." Daniel was led away, as still shouting threats and accusations, but the words faded as the courtroom doors closed behind him. Jack and Emma stood in the sudden quiet, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like snow. Outside the courthouse, standing in afternoon sunlight, a messenger approached. A young man in dusty clothes carrying sealed letters. "Miss Hayes, I have news about your father." Emma took the letter, read it quickly, and her face went pale. Jack moved closer. "What is it?" "My father. He had a stroke 1 week ago. He's dying." She handed him a second letter, this one from William's attorney. Jack read through it, his jaw tightening. William had changed his will just before the stroke, leaving Emma everything. The house, the timber business, all his investments. Daniel got nothing punishment for the fraud. It was a fortune enough for Emma to live comfortably for the rest of her life. "That's significant money," Jack said carefully. Emma's voice was flat. "I don't want it." "Emma, give it to charity. Help families who can't afford medical care. Build a school. I don't care, but I don't want it." She looked at him and her eyes were fierce. "That's not my life anymore. My life is on the mountain. With you." The attorney, overhearing, looked shocked. "Miss Hayes, this is a fortune. You'd be set for life." "I already am set for life." She handed the letters back. "Do whatever's necessary to donate it. I'll sign whatever papers you need, but I'm not taking it." Jack stared at her, seeing not just determination, but absolute certainty. She meant it. She was walking away from wealth that most people would kill for choosing, instead a hard life on a mountain with a man who'd admitted publicly to treating her as property. The attorney sputtered protest, but Emma cut him off. "There's one thing I need to do first. My father asked for me. He's dying, and I need to close that door on my terms." She looked at Jack. "I'm going to Ashford Creek. Alone. Some things I need to do myself." Jack wanted to argue, wanted to go with her, wanted to protect her from whatever pain waited there. But he understood. This was Emma claiming her own closure, making her own peace. "I'll be here when you get back." Emma nodded, turned to leave, then stopped and looked back. "I will come back, Jack. This is my choice, my home. Don't doubt that." She rode out an hour later alone, leaving Jack in Red Creek with 4 days to wait in and worry and wonder if he had finally pushed his luck too far. The journey to Ashford Creek took Emma most of the day. She rode through familiar landscape that felt foreign now, too flat, too tame, too full of fences and property lines in human order imposed on wildness. She arrived at dusk riding straight to her childhood home. The house looked smaller than she remembered, less imposing. Linda opened the door, her sister-in-law's face a mixture of shock and poorly concealed relief. "Emma, we heard you were coming." She stepped aside reluctantly. "He's in the bedroom. The doctor's with him now." Emma walked through rooms filled with memory and nothing else. Her father's bedroom door stood open, revealing William in the bed, shrunken and gray, a shadow of the hard man who'd stood beside her at that altar. The doctor was packing his bag, shaking his head. "There's nothing more I can do. Keep him comfortable. He might last a week, might last a month. Hard to say with strokes." He left and Emma approached the bed slowly. William's eyes tracked to her movement, his left side completely still, his right hand trembling as he tried to reach toward her. His mouth worked, forming words that wouldn't come. Emma sat in the chair beside the bed, examining him with the clinical eye Jack had taught her. Massive stroke, left side paralyzed, speech centers damaged. She could see the fear in his eyes, the awful awareness of his own helplessness. She pulled medicines from her bag, the ones Jack had prepared. "This one's for pain. This might reduce inflammation in your brain, help you recover some function. No guarantees, but it's worth trying." She administered the first dose, carefully tilting his head, making sure he could swallow. William's good eye watched her with something like wonder, as if seeing her for the first time. For 3 days, Emma tended her father with the same competence she'd bring to any patient. She kept him clean, managed his medications, adjusted his position to prevent bed sores. She talked to him about the mountains, about the work she did there, about the person she'd become. She didn't know how much he understood, but his eyes never left her face when she spoke. On the second day, he managed a single word, slurred and barely intelligible. "Sorry." Emma sat very still, feeling the weight of that word, all it meant and all it couldn't undo. "I know, but sorry doesn't change what happened. You traded me like property because it was easier than dealing with your debt, honestly. You never asked what I wanted, never considered I might have value beyond settling accounts." William's face crumpled, tears leaking from his good eye. But Emma's voice softened. "What you did gave me something you never intended. It gave me freedom, a chance to discover who I actually am, what I'm capable of. So in the end, your worst decision became my greatest gift." She took his trembling hand. "I forgive you, Father. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I deserve to let go of the anger and move forward. That's what I'm doing now." William squeezed her hand with what little strength remained, and more tears came. On the 4th day, Emma packed her bag, measured out doses of medicine, and left instructions for Linda on how to administer them. William was awake, watching her prepare to leave. "I'm going home tomorrow, back to the mountains. But I'm glad I came, glad we had this time." William's mouth worked hard, managed 2 words. "Stay. Please." Emma bent and kissed his forehead. "No, my life is there now, but I'll come if you need me. Send word and I'll come." She left before the tears gathering in her eyes could fall. William died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep. Emma heard the news from a rider who brought it to Medicine Peak 2 weeks after the fact. She grieved but gently, the wound already healing from the closure she'd claimed. But that was later. Now riding back to Red Creek, Emma felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of family obligation, of old resentments and unspoken hurts had lifted. She'd made her peace and chosen her future. Jack was waiting on the boarding house porch when she arrived at sunset, and the relief on his face when he saw her was almost worth the 4 days apart. Almost. Emma dismounted, suddenly exhausted. "I'm back." Jack stood, moved toward her. "You're back. And I'm staying, no matter what inheritance or opportunity or anything else comes along. This is home. You're my partner. That's my choice made freely, and I'm done questioning it." Something shifted in Jack's expression, a wall coming down, a distance closing. "Good, because I would have come after you tomorrow, like I promised. Would have dragged you back if necessary." Emma laughed, surprised by the fierceness in his voice. "You can't drag someone who wants to be here." "No, but I can remind them they're wanted." Wanted, the word hung between them, heavy with meaning neither had been willing to speak. They stood facing each other in the fading light, two people thrown together by circumstances. Neither had chosen, who'd somehow found in each other exactly what they'd been missing without knowing they were incomplete. Jack spoke first, his voice rougher than usual. "I need to tell you something." Emma's heart quickened. "All right. When I agreed to your father's arrangement, I told myself it was practical. I needed help. You needed escape. Simple transaction." He paused, choosing words carefully. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being simple. Emma waited, afraid to breathe, afraid to break whatever was happening. "I watch you with patience," Jack continued. "Weigh your competence and compassion. See how you've claimed this life, grown into yourself. And I realized that what started as obligation became something I don't have words for." He met her eyes. "I'm not asking for anything, just needed you to know." Emma felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "When I came to the mountain, I was so broken I didn't even know it. I thought I was whole, just unwanted. But you showed me the difference. You gave me work that mattered, respect I earned, space to become who I actually am." She stepped closer. "And somewhere into that process, I stopped seeing you as just a teacher or partner. I started seeing you as someone I'd choose every day, regardless of debt or obligation or anything else." Jack's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this stopped being simple for me, too." Jack reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. His hand cupped her face, calloused and gentle, and Emma leaned into it, feeling safe and seen in a way she'd never experienced. When he kissed her, it was careful questioning, giving her space to refuse. But Emma didn't want to refuse. She kissed him back, pouring into it all the things she couldn't say: gratitude and partnership, and the bone-deep certainty that this was right. They stood together in the firelight, spilling from the boarding house, the world reduced to this moment and each other. Emma thought about all the paths that had led here, the humiliation at the altar, the hard climb into the mountains, the months of learning and growing and discovering her own strength. Every difficult thing had been necessary. Every moment of doubt had taught her something. And all of it had led to this, standing in a dusty street with a man who valued her competence more than her appearance, who respected her choices, who saw her clearly and wanted her anyway. "So what are we building?" Jack asked quietly. Emma thought about partnership, practice, home, future. But what she said was simpler and truer, something worth fighting for. Jack smiled, transforming his usually serious face. "Then let's keep fighting." Back in the cabin at Medicine Peak 40 years later, Jack Stone pulled himself from the memory. The fire had burned low again, and Thomas sat silent, pen-forgotten, eyes wide. "That was when I knew," Jack said quietly. Not a slow realization, not gradually falling, just sudden clarity. She was everything. Partner, equal, the person I wanted to build a life with. Thomas found his voice. "And you told her, Bowen, eventually, after winter tested us, because admitting feelings is one thing, proving you're worthy of them is another." He stood creaky and slow. "That's enough for tonight, son. Rest. Tomorrow we continue, and you'll understand why the hardest part of any story is the middle, when you have everything to lose and no guarantee you'll keep it." Thomas rose, gathered his notebook. "Thank you, Mr. Stone, for trusting me with this." Jack waved him off. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you have learned the lesson and passed it forward. That's when it matters." After Thomas left, Jack sat alone by the dying fire, seeing Emma's face in the flames, hearing her voice in the wind outside. The memory was so vivid he could almost believe she'd walk through the door any moment, shaking snow from her coat, demanding to know why he hadn't started supper yet. But she wouldn't. She was 2 years gone, buried on the mountain she'd chosen, and Jack was left with stories and lessons and the weight of keeping promises to the dead. He added another log to the fire and settled in to wait for morning. Thomas arrived the next morning as dawn broke over Medicine Peak, the sky streaked with orange and gold. Jack was already awake, had been for hours, sitting by the window and watching the snow fall in the pre-dawn darkness. The young man stamped snow from his boots on the porch, knocked softly, and entered to find coffee already made and the fire burning bright. "You're eager," Jack observed, pouring a second cup. "I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what you said, about proving yourself worthy." Jack handed him the coffee, gestured to the chair. "That's the part most men fail at, son. Words are easy, actions are hard. Staying when things get difficult, that's where character shows." He settled into his own chair, the leather creaking familiar beneath him. You want to know if Emma and I made it, if the story has a happy ending. Thomas nodded, pen already out. I want to know how you proved it, how you kept the promise. Jack smiled, but there was sadness in it. Winter in the high country tests everything. Tests supplies, tests patience, tests resolve. And it definitely tests relationships. If you can't survive winter together, you can't build a life together. He stared into his coffee cup, seeing not the dark liquid, but a memory of snow and blood and desperate choices. November of 1885. Emma and I returned from Red Creek different than we'd left. Not just because of the trial or Daniel's arrest, because we'd finally been honest with each other. Finally admitted what we were becoming. Thomas leaned forward. Were you happy? Jack considered the question. Happy maybe. Scared definitely. Because admitting you care about someone means giving them the power to hurt you. And I'd spent 15 years making sure nobody had that power. He set down his cup. But Emma was worth the risk, worth the fear. So when winter came early that year, when the first real snow buried us 3 weeks ahead of schedule, I was grateful. Because it meant time. Time to figure out what we were building. Time to prove I could be the partner she deserved. The old man's eyes grew distant. Time to face the hardest tests either of us had ever known. The memory rose like a wave, pulling Jack under. Emma woke one November morning to find the cabin buried to the windowsills, the world outside transformed into white silence. She dressed quickly in layers of wool, pulled on her boots, and found Jack already in the main room stoking the fire. This is just the beginning, he said without looking up from the flames. We'll be snowed in for weeks, maybe months. Last winter, I didn't see another human being from December through March. Emma poured coffee from the pot that always sat warming on the stove. Good thing you're not just any human being. Jack glanced at her, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Good thing. The outside work became impossible. The garden lay buried, the trails impassable, the forest locked in ice. But the inside work multiplied. They compounded medicines together, working side by side in the warm cabin, while snow piled higher against the walls. Jack taught Emma the delicate art of mixing tinctures in precise ratios, preparing pills by hand using mortar and pestle until her shoulders ached. They cataloged supplies, took inventory, calculated what they'd need to last until spring. Emma checked the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, making notes in the journal. We're low on willow bark, and we used more arnica than expected this fall. Jack ground dried roots into powder, the rhythmic sound filling the cabin. We'll manage, we always do. Real question is whether anyone will make it up here needing treatment in this snow. Would take desperation. 3 days later, as if summoned by his words, pounding came at the door. During a blizzard. Jack opened it to reveal a man half frozen, covered in snow, his face raw from wind. Behind him, barely visible through the storm, was a horse carrying a bundled figure. Please, the man gasped. My wife, the baby's coming early. We were trying to reach the doctor in Red Creek, but the storm. We can't go any further. Jack and Emma moved as 1 year of working together compressed into months, their movements synchronized without need for words. They brought the woman inside, carried her to the bedroom, got her out of frozen clothes and into the warm bed. She was young, maybe 20, and her face was twisted with pain and fear. Her belly was huge, but when Emma felt it examining with the careful touch Jack had taught her, she knew immediately something was wrong. The baby's breech, she said quietly to Jack. I can feel the position. Jack examined the woman quickly, his face grave. How long have you been in labor? He asked the husband. Since yesterday morning. The man was shaking, whether from cold or fear, Emma couldn't tell. The midwife in our town said the baby was turned wrong, that we needed a doctor. But the storm came up so fast. Jack muttered something under his breath, then turned to Emma, his voice low. I need you here. She's lost too much blood, and the baby won't turn from outside. I'll have to reach in, turn it manually. It's dangerous for both of them. Emma's stomach dropped, but her voice stayed steady. What do you need me to do? Keep her calm, monitor her breathing. If I tell you to prepare the saw, you'll know we're in trouble. The saw, Emma's mind recoiled from what that meant. Amputation. Sacrificing the child to save the mother. She prayed it wouldn't come to that. Jack scrubbed his hands and arms thoroughly, then administered laudanum to the woman to help with the pain. What's your name? Emma asked gently, taking her hand. Anne. Her voice was weak. Anne Whitmore. Is my baby going to die? Not if we can help it, Jack said, his tone brooking no argument. But I won't lie to you. This is going to hurt worse than anything you've felt. Do you understand? Anne nodded, tears streaming down her face. What followed was the longest night of Emma's life, longer even than Sarah's crisis, because this time there were two lives hanging in the balance. Jack worked with absolute focus, his hands gentle but firm, as he reached inside trying to manipulate the baby into the correct position. Anne screamed. Her young husband held her other hand, his face white with terror. Emma wiped Anne's forehead, murmured encouragements that felt hollow against such agony, and watched Jack work with steady, careful precision. Time lost all meaning. The wind howled outside. The fire crackled. And Jack worked his concentration absolute, his movements careful and deliberate. Emma could see the strain in his face, the way his jaw clenched with effort, the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. There, he said, finally his voice tight. I've got the feet. Emma, be ready. When the contractions start again, this baby's coming fast. He was right. Within minutes, Anne was pushing, and then suddenly there was a baby, tiny and blue, and terribly, terribly silent. Jack held it upside down and slapped its back firmly. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Emma's heart stopped. The baby was dead. After all that, after everything they'd failed. Jack slapped again, harder this time. A thin, reedy cry filled the cabin. The baby's color shifted from blue to pink, and its cries grew stronger, more insistent, the sound of new life declaring itself against the storm. Jack wrapped it quickly in warm blankets and handed it to Emma while he attended to Anne, who was bleeding heavily, but not dangerously, not anymore. Emma looked down at the tiny girl in her arms, perfect and furious and alive. She'd never held a newborn before, never felt the weight of a new life so directly. Something shifted in her chest, a fierce, protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed. A girl, she told the parents once Anne was stable and the bleeding controlled. Small but healthy, strong lungs, good color. She's a fighter. Anne wept with relief. Her husband kissed her forehead, then came to see his daughter, his hands trembling as Emma placed the baby in his arms. Thank you, he said, his voice breaking. Both of you, I don't know how to repay this. Jack, washing blood from his hands, spoke quietly. Name her after someone who matters. That's payment enough. The Whitmores stayed for 2 weeks until Anne was strong enough to travel and the weather cleared enough to make the journey safe. During that time, Emma cared for both mother and baby, teaching Anne how to nurse, how to recognize signs of fever or infection, how to trust her own instincts as a mother. On their last evening, Anne took Emma's hand. You saved our lives. Both of us. I won't forget that. Emma started to deflect to say Jack had done the hard part, but Anne squeezed her hand. No, he has the knowledge, but you have something else. You made me feel safe even when I was terrified. That matters just as much. She paused, studying Emma's face. You're different than when I first saw you. Stronger somehow. Emma thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, standing humiliated at an altar, believing herself worthless. That woman felt like a stranger now. I had good teachers, she said simply. After the Whitmores left, the cabin felt strangely empty. Emma and Jack returned to their routines, but something had shifted between them. Emma caught Jack watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read, and she found herself noticing things she'd trained herself to ignore, the way his hands moved with such precision, the rare times he smiled, the sound of his voice in the quiet evenings when they sat by the fire. The attraction had always been there, simmering beneath the surface of their partnership. But now, with winter pressing in and nowhere to run from what they felt, it became impossible to ignore. One night in late December, with snow falling softly outside and the fire burning low, Jack set down the journal he'd been reading and looked at her directly. I need to tell you something else. Emma's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. All right. Jack stood, moved to the window, looking out at the darkness and falling snow. 20 years ago, when I told you I was indentured in Boston, I didn't tell you everything. He turned to face her. My parents sold me when I was 14, 7-year contract to a shipyard owner. That man was cruel, beat his workers, withheld food, treated us like animals because that's what he believed we were. His hands clenched into fists, old rage still burning. At 18, I ran, stole a horse and headed west. Bounty hunters chased me for 2 years before giving up. By the time I reached Montana, I was half dead from living rough, from always looking over my shoulder from the fear that they'd catch me and drag me back. Emma stood, moved closer. You were traded too, like me. Jack nodded. That's why I gave you a choice. Why I couldn't force you. Because I know what it's like to have no choice, to be treated as property instead of a person. He met her eyes. And that's why what I did, taking you as payment for your father's debt, was such a profound betrayal of everything I'd promised to myself. I became the thing I hated most. Emma took his hand, feeling the calluses, the old scars, the tremor of emotion he was fighting to control. You gave me the choice. You didn't force me. I put you in a position where you had no good options. That's manipulation, even if it's not outright force. Maybe, Emma said, but you also gave me the space to grow into myself, to discover my own strength, to choose you back freely and completely. She squeezed his hand. We're both orphans of bad bargains. Both turned what was meant to break us into what made us stronger. That's not something to regret. That's something to honor. Jack pulled her close and they stood together in the firelight, two people who'd been thrown together by circumstances neither had chosen, but who'd made those circumstances into something worth keeping. So what happens now? Emma asked quietly. Now we keep doing what we've been doing. We work. We heal. We survive winter. He smiled, rare and genuine, but we do it knowing what we are to each other. Is that enough? Jack's voice was rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. It's everything. But winter wasn't finished testing them. February brought a crisis that made even the breech birth seem simple by comparison. A group of miners caught in an avalanche were brought to the cabin, 10 injured men ranging from broken bones to severe frostbite. For 3 weeks, the cabin became a field hospital, every available space filled with suffering and the smell of blood and infection. Emma and Jack worked around the clock, setting bones, treating frostbite, fighting infections. They operated as a seamless team, Jack starting a procedure and Emma already handing him the next instrument before he asked, their movements synchronized by months of practice and something deeper, an understanding that went beyond words. 2 men died despite their best efforts. Internal bleeding. Jack couldn't stop. Infection, too far advanced to fight. Emma sat with each one as they passed, holding their hands, ensuring they weren't alone in those final moments. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, watching life slip away and being unable to stop it. After the second death, she walked outside into the bitter cold, stood in the snow and cried for the men. She couldn't help, for the limits of human knowledge, for the brutal unfairness of a world where trying your best sometimes wasn't enough. Jack found her there, put his arm around her shoulders. You can't save everyone. That's the hardest lesson in healing work. Sometimes your best isn't enough. Emma's voice was raw. Then what's the point? The point is trying anyway. The point is, we saved 8 men who would have died without us. The point is, those 2 who didn't make it weren't alone at the end. They had someone who cared, someone who fought for them until there was nothing left to fight with. He turned her to face him. We do what we can with what we have. That's all anyone can do. And you did everything possible, Emma. Those men knew that. Their families will know that. And when you're 80 years old and looking back, you'll know that too. Emma leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence, from the solid certainty of his belief in her. She understood then what he'd been trying to teach her all along. Healing wasn't about perfect success rates or saving everyone. It was about showing up, doing the work, caring for people, even when you knew you might lose them. It was about being human in the face of suffering, competent in crisis, and humble enough to accept your limitations. The survivors left in March when the snow finally began to melt and the trails became passable again. They paid what they could, some in pounds, some in promises, one in a beautiful hand-carved chess set that Jack accepted with surprising pleasure. Didn't know you played chess, Emma said that evening, examining the pieces. Anna taught me, said it was good for learning to think ahead, to see patterns. He set up the board. Want to learn? They played that night and many nights after. Emma's strategic mind took to the game naturally. She lost more than she won, but she learned quickly, and Jack seemed to enjoy having a worthy opponent. Spring arrived slowly, grudgingly, the snow retreating inch by inch up the mountainsides. The meadow emerged muddy and bedraggled, but within weeks it transformed, wildflowers bursting forth in a riot of color. Emma had survived her first mountain winter, and the accomplishment felt significant, earned through blood and sweat and tears, and the slow building of something that couldn't be taken away. One morning in early April, she woke to find Jack already up standing on the porch and watching the sunrise. She joined him, and they stood in comfortable silence as light spilled over the peaks, painting everything gold. "I've been thinking," Jack said finally. Emma's heart quickened, "about making this partnership official." He turned to face her, and in the dawn light, she could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of rejection warring with hope. "I mean, we should marry, properly, legally, because we choose to, not because of debt or obligation." Emma's breath caught. Jack continued, the words coming faster now, as if he'd been rehearsing them. "I know marriage is what got you into trouble in the first place. I know you might not want anything to do with ceremonies or vows or making it official. But Emma, I want the world to know that you're not my employee or my apprentice or some arrangement we fell into by accident." He took her hands. "I want them to know you're my partner, my equal, the person I choose every day to build this life with." Emma felt tears gather in her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that came from being truly seen and valued. "Yes," Jack blinked. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you're my partner in every way that matters, and I'd like to make that formal." She smiled. "Besides, Margaret will never let us hear the end of it if we don't." Jack laughed, a sound of pure joy that Emma had rarely heard from him. "She did mention it last time we saw her. Said it was about time we stopped dancing around what was obvious to everyone else." They were married in May on a bright morning when the meadow was thick with lupine and columbine. Margaret performed the ceremony, having been ordained years ago for exactly such purposes on the frontier. Thomas Brennan rode up from Red Creek to witness along with Sheriff Dawson. Anne and her husband came baby in arms along with a few other patients who'd become friends. It was simple and perfect. Emma wore a dress she'd sewn herself from blue calico. Jack wore his best shirt, cleaned and pressed. They spoke their vows standing in the meadow with the mountains as witness, promising partnership and respect and the freedom to be fully themselves. Jack's vows were spare and honest, the kind of promises that came from a man who'd learned not to waste words. "I came to these mountains running from what I was. Anna taught me who I could be. But Emma, you taught me who I want to be. Not just a healer, not just a survivor, a man worthy of partnership with an extraordinary woman." His voice was rough but steady. "I promise to respect your choices, value your strength, stand beside you, not in front, not behind, but beside, for as long as the mountains stand and breath remains." Emma's vows were equally simple. "I came here believing I was worthless. You showed me I was priceless, not through words but through trusting me with real work, treating me like a partner before I'd earned it. I promise to bring everything I have to this partnership, my strength, my skills, my stubborn refusal to quit, and my choice every day to build this life with you." Margaret pronounced them married, and the small gathering cheered. They shared a simple meal of venison, fresh bread, and wildberry pie. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Emma felt a completeness she'd never known before. Not just in partnership with Jack, but in herself, in the life she'd claimed and defended, and now was expanding into something even larger. That evening, sitting on the porch as darkness fell, Emma broached the idea that had been growing in her mind all winter. "What do we do now?" Jack smiled. "Same thing we've always done. Work, heal, build. But maybe build something more." She turned to face him. "Train more apprentices. Teach others what you taught me. Establish a real clinic, something permanent that will outlast us both." The ideas tumbled out, forming as she spoke. "Anna taught you. You taught me. We teach others, and they teach others. Eventually, there's a whole network of healers across the territories, all learning from this tradition." Jack listened, and something like wonder crossed his face. "You've been thinking about this all winter." "While we were snowed in, while we were treating those miners, I kept thinking about how many people need this kind of care and how few providers there are. We can't help everyone ourselves, but we could multiply our impact by teaching others." Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening meadow. "Teaching takes time. Not everyone has the aptitude. So we're selective. We find people like me, people who need purpose, who have the capacity to learn, who will respect the work and the tradition. She took his hand. We build something that matters, something that lasts beyond us. Jack's voice was soft when he finally spoke. Anna always said knowledge was meant to be shared, not hoarded. I've been too protective of it, too solitary. But you're right. It's time to open it up. Let it grow. He looked at her directly. On one condition. What? You lead the teaching. You have a gift I don't. Patience. Understanding what students need. I'll handle the medical emergencies, the difficult cases. But you build the program. Train the teachers. Create the legacy. Emma realized what he was offering. True partnership. Not him helping her or her supporting him, but equal stake, equal say, building together something larger than either could create alone. Yes, she said, let's do it. Summer brought their first apprentice. Ruth arrived on a hot July afternoon, a young widow of 25 with two small children and nowhere else to go. Her husband had died in a mining accident, leaving her with no prospects and a brother-in-law who made it clear she and her children were burdens he couldn't afford. Emma saw herself in Ruth's eyes, the same desperate hope mixed with shame, the belief that she was a charity case rather than a valuable person. So Emma did for Ruth what Jack had done for her. She gave her work that mattered, taught her skills with real value, treated her with respect she didn't know she deserved. Not charity, but opportunity. By autumn, Ruth was competent with basic remedies and patient care. Her children thrived in the mountain air, growing strong and confident. And Ruth herself transformed from a grief-stricken widow into a capable healer with steady hands and a gentle manner that patients responded to. One evening, Jack found Emma reviewing Ruth's journal entries, making notes on what to teach next. You're good at this. Teaching, I mean. Better than I ever was. Emma looked up. Because I remember how it feels to be the student, to be uncertain and scared, but desperate to prove yourself worthy. She closed the journal. Ruth reminds me of who I was. I want to give her what you gave me, the chance to discover her own strength. Jack smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. You're doing more than that. You're building exactly what Anna dreamed of. Knowledge flowing forward, not dying with one person, but spreading like seeds on the wind. As the year turned and snow began to fall again, Emma stood in the meadow one evening watching the sunset. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the humiliation at the church, the hard climb into the mountains, the slow building of confidence and skill. She thought about facing Daniel, forgiving her father, choosing this life again and again, even when easier paths appeared. And she thought about what she'd built with Jack. Not just a marriage or a partnership, but a life of purpose and meaning, where her worth was measured in lives helped, knowledge, shared, difference made in the world. Jack came out to stand beside her, his presence warm and solid in the cold air. What are you thinking about? How far I've come. How that church in Ashford Creek feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to someone else. Jack's voice was gentle. In a way it did. You're not that woman anymore. No, I'm not. That woman thought she was being traded like property, that she had no value beyond settling someone else's debt. Emma turned to face him, this man who'd seen past her shame to her potential, who'd given her space to grow into herself, who'd become her partner in every sense that mattered. This woman knows she's valuable because she made herself valuable. Knows she belongs here because she claimed it, fought for it, built it with her own hands. And what does this woman want now? Jack asked quietly. Emma smiled. She wants to keep building, keep healing, keep teaching others to claim their own worth the way she did. And she wants to do it all with you for as long as we both live. Jack pulled her close and they stood together in the fading light, two people thrown together by circumstances neither had chosen, but who'd made those circumstances into something beautiful and lasting. Back in the present, in the cabin at Medicine Peak, Jack Stone pulled himself from the memory. The fire had burned down to embers, and dawn was breaking outside, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. Thomas stirred in his chair, having dozed off sometime during the night. He woke with a start, looked around in confusion, then saw Jack watching him with amusement. Sorry, Mr. Stone, I didn't mean to fall asleep. No need to apologize, it's a long story. Jack stood, moved to the window. But we're almost finished now, just one more part. The part where I teach you why I'm telling you all this. Thomas rubbed his eyes, picked up his pen. I'm ready. Jack turned from the window, and in the dawn light he looked every one of his 78 years, but also something more. peaceful, complete. Emma and I had 38 years together. We trained 47 apprentices. 15 stayed became healers themselves. We built a network across 5 territories, treated thousands of patients. His voice thickened slightly. She died 2 years ago. Pneumonia. Ironic, a healer dying from an illness we'd treated hundreds of times. But she was 63. She'd lived a full life. He paused. A good life, a life she chose. Thomas said nothing, giving Jack space for his grief. I'm telling you this story for a reason, son. Not to be romantic, not to impress you, to warn you. Warn me about what? Jack's eyes were fierce. Never take a person's choice from them. Doesn't matter your motivation. Doesn't matter if you think you know him better. The moment you decide for someone, you make them property. I did that. Almost lost everything because of it. He moved back to his chair, settled into it with a sigh. Emma forgave me, gave me a chance to prove I could be better. But some people won't get that chance. Some mistakes can't be fixed. So don't make them. Thomas met his eyes. I understand, sir. Do you? Because understanding and doing are different things? Jack leaned forward. You came here wanting to learn healing. I can teach you that. Have the knowledge, have the time left. But I won't take you as an apprentice. Thomas's face fell. Why not? Because I don't take, I offer. You choose. Jack's voice was firm. I offer you apprenticeship. Training in healing arts knowledge passed down from Anna Redbird through me to you. Hard work, long hours, isolation, and winters that will test everything you think you know about yourself. He paused. In return, you get skills that will feed you for life. Knowledge that can save lives. And a place in a tradition that goes back generations. But you have to choose it. Actively. Completely. Understanding what you're saying yes to. Thomas didn't hesitate. I choose yes. Why? The question caught Thomas off guard. Because I want to help people. Because my father says, you're the best healer in Montana. Because. He stopped, thought harder. Because I don't want to spend my life wondering what I could have been if I'd had the courage to treat. Jack nodded slowly. Good answer. Honest answer. He stood, moved to the shelves, pulled down the leather-bound journal. 3 sets of handwriting filled its pages, delicate and flowing, bold and angular, careful and precise. Anna, Jack, Emma. This is the legacy. Add your voice to it. He handed the journal to Thomas, who took it with reverence, feeling the weight of what he was being entrusted with. We start tomorrow. Same way I started with Emma. Meadow plants. You'll learn to identify, harvest, prepare. Won't be easy. Won't be comfortable. Jack's voice softened slightly. But if you stick with it, if you choose it every day, you'll build something that matters. Something that outlasts you. That's what Emma taught me. That's what I'm teaching you. Thank you, Mr. Stone, for trusting me with this. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've trained your first apprentice. When you've passed the knowledge forward. That's when the debt is paid. That's when Emma's sacrifice and mine means something. After Thomas left to prepare for the day's work, Jack stood alone in the cabin. He walked slowly to the door, pulled on his heavy coat, and stepped out into the cold morning. The walk to the meadow took longer than it used to, his joints protesting the cold, his breath coming short at the altitude that had once been nothing to him. But he made it, stood where the old cabin had been before it burned down in 1923 and was rebuilt smaller. Stood where Emma had stood that first day, uncertain and angry and trapped. Where they'd married, surrounded by friends and mountains. Where they'd taught dozens of students. Jack closed his eyes and saw Emma. Not old and sick, but young and fierce, eyes burning with determination, telling him she could work. She was stronger than she looked. She wouldn't quit. And he saw her transformed, confident healer, respected teacher, partner in every sense. I was wrong to take you that way, he whispered to the wind in the memory. Wrong to think obligation could substitute for choice. But you made something beautiful from my mistake. You taught me redemption is possible, even for broken men who've made terrible decisions. He looked across the valley. 3 cabins stood now, other healers who'd trained here and stayed. The clinic they'd built together. The garden Emma had planted, still producing 40 years later. Students still coming, still learning. I kept my promise, love. Stayed beside you. Not in front, not behind. Treated you as partner until your last breath. And I'm still keeping it. training the next generation, passing it forward, like you wanted. The snow fell heavier, and Jack knew he should go inside. But he stood a moment longer, feeling Emma's presence in the wind, in the meadow, in the mountains, in the legacy they'd built together. "Thank you," he said to the silence and the snow and the memory, "for choosing me. Every day, despite everything. For teaching this old fool what partnership really means. For showing me redemption isn't about perfection. It's about choosing better. Every single day." He turned and walked back to the cabin, smoke rising from its chimney. Tomorrow Thomas would arrive for his first lesson, and the cycle would continue. Knowledge flowing forward like water, never stopping, always moving toward the future. Jack Stone climbed the porch steps, paused at the door, and looked back one more time at the meadow where everything had begun and everything had been built. The mountains stood eternal witnesses to transformation and growth, to the woman Emma had been and the woman she'd become. She'd arrived believing herself worthless and discovered she was invaluable. She'd come thinking she was being exiled and found home. The bargain that had seemed like her lowest moment had become her greatest gift. Not because it was fair or kind, but because she'd taken it and transformed it, alchemizing humiliation into dignity, obligation into choice, survival into purpose. Jack had been traded to settle a debt and told to show everything. And he had. He'd shown his shame, his mistakes, his capacity for wrongdoing. He'd shown his fear of connection and his desperate need for it. He'd shown his weakness and eventually his strength. And in showing everything and being truly seen by Emma and choosing to see her in return, he'd found redemption. The wind rose, carrying the first snowflakes of a new storm. Inside the cabin, the fire waited warm and welcoming. The journal lay ready for Thomas's first entries. The medicines were prepared. The knowledge was ready to be passed forward. Jack Stone stepped inside, closed the door against the cold, and settled by the fire to wait for the student who would carry the legacy into the future. This was the true bargain he understood now. Not the one William Hayes had struck, but the one he and Emma had made with themselves and each other to show up, fully work, without reservation, claim worth through action rather than waiting for permission. They'd kept that bargain every day of their lives together. And through Thomas, through all the students who would come after, the bargain would continue. Knowledge and compassion and the stubborn belief that broken people could still build beautiful things. The fire crackled, the snow fell, and Jack Stone, mountain healer, widower, teacher, sat in the warmth and the silence and the gathering light of a new day, ready to begin again. The mountains had demanded everything from him and Emma. They'd given it gladly. In return, the mountains had given them back themselves, stronger, clearer, more fully realized than either had imagined possible. That was enough. That was everything. And the story, like the knowledge, like the love, would live on.